All right. Good evening, everybody. Sorry, I'm a couple of minutes late. I think I'd said that would start at 17:45. Kindly asking if you could just do a thumbs up if you can hear me just fine, so that we can start, I guess. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So we're going to continue our our discussion of 5019, which is research methodology. And before we start, I wanted to maybe start off by highlighting something that affects those of us that are doing coursework this year. I know we have a number of colleagues that are probably in their second year of study, maybe third year of study, or perhaps they're doctoral students, and so this obviously doesn't apply to them. But you'll have noticed that I forwarded a memo from the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Academic Affairs. I think it is. I guess this is me saying that I equally have well, no clue what is happening here. So all I did was I just forwarded the message, right, exactly as it came through to us. And I do this because we're well aware of the fact that there could be some of our students that do not receive emails that come through officially from public relations. Okay, so there's a public relations mailing list which is typically used to forward important information to students and the wider university community anyway, if that makes sense. Incidentally, I know there was a directive for classes to cease. So ideally, as of I think yesterday, ideally, we're not supposed to have class today, but because of the memo, which explicitly hints at the fact that exams have been postponed, we figured we could just as well continue having this last year. Yeah. So in case you have questions for me, I don't have answers regarding when exams are going to be administered. At this rate, it's entirely possible that there's a possibility that they may push these exams towards the end of the day. So together with the term 2 exams. And as I sympathize with you, I know this is obviously a very difficult or confusing period, right? You study for the exam and then you're told it's not happening, Anyway, so we're going to continue, our discussion of 5019. Unless if there are thoughts or questions, we can start. What's particularly interesting about what we've been doing is we are still kind of trying to ease our way into the course. So in essence, we are still looking at the introduction. Ideally, I think we should be able to finalize this today, hopefully, and then transition to the next topic, ideally. Okay. So yesterday, if you remember, well, not yesterday, last week, if you remember, we actually started going through the 7-step research process. Okay, and what we discovered was that there's quite a bit that goes on here. So we started off with the very first step, which requires that we frame or we define the research problem we're working on. Okay. After that, you go through a systematic process of understanding the topic. So you research the topic itself. This is just a fancy way of saying you conduct a literature review. And you notice that the seven steps we are discussing are actually mapped or can be mapped onto the the phases of the scientific method. So the diagram that is on your right, the current slide. Okay, so you define the research problem as part of step number 1, and then you get on with your literature review process exercise. We know what that entails, and then you formulate, your objectives and research questions or hypotheses. There's something interesting here. Sometimes, depending on, I guess, what sort of literature you're reading, it's entirely possible that this stage here, step 3, could immediately follow the observation slash question. But the argument one would make here is that you would want to formulate your problem only after you read up on what other people have done. In essence, only after you identify potential gaps as they exist in existing literature, if this makes sense. I hope I'm talking to myself here. So quiet. Okay. Anyways, so step number 3 is formulation of objectives, research questions, where applicable, also hypotheses, and all those things. And then step number 4 is the study design or the experimental design or research design, depending on who you talk to. In fact, depending on a particular domain, research domain, people make reference to this stage using different ways, right? In the physical sciences, like computing and engineering, it would be generally experimental design, whereas in the social sciences, they'll probably use the word study design or something. It's one and the same thing, really. And one of the things I highlighted was the fact that there are a series of things that you get to undertake as part of this experimental design, right? We went through a process where we were attempting to enumerate, or rather identify, some of these important stages. Okay. Now, depending on what sort of study you're working towards, there could be other additional things you may include, lump into here, right? And some things may not necessarily be applicable. Okay. But you obviously have got to outline the research approach, we said. And the gory details of what exactly you do here in terms of the research approach, what specific types of research approaches are there. These will come through once you start interacting with Professor Piri, because I believe he's the one who's going to handle this, right? You typically would be expected to outline the philosophical view, right? So your world view as it relates to the research that you're undertaking. And then you have things like I want to say research design, is it? I'll come back to research design here, because this is where we're stopped off. You typically also outline details to do with data analysis, and then ethical consideration. Okay. So the idea is, in the methodology in your chapter 3, if you're writing your thesis, or your section 3, if you're writing a paper to be submitted to a journal, right? So you're drafting a journal article, or indeed if you're writing your proposal, this will be typically under section 3. So it will be like this. In fact, it will be like this, is it? Methodology or something, or research methodology, or study design, or procedures and methods. Doesn't matter, right? People in the life sciences will like using the word procedures and methods, but it's one and the same thing. And then under study design, you notice that you'd have a whole range of things here. So you outline the target population, for instance. Okay. So where exactly do you anticipate, or where are you planning to collect your data from? If I'm conducting a study to try and appreciate the sanitation challenges at UNZA, my target population here will be full-time students, right? Full-time students at UNZA. In fact, can be specific. The population could be full-time undergraduate students, or full-time postgraduate students, or just general full-time students. Or if I want to collect data from all students at UNZA, I'll just say all students at UNZA, currently registered at UNZA, something like that. That's target population. Now, tied to the target population is this notion of sampling, right? So it's generally not always possible for you to collect data from the entire population. If I'm conducting a study at UNZA with all students, or let's just keep it short here. With I want to collect data, and my target population is postgraduate students in the Department of Computing and Informatics. It is not feasible. It's generally not feasible, or it would not be feasible for me to collect data from all postgraduate students at UNZA. Why? Well, at any given point in time, some people may be sick, right? So if I'm collecting data using a questionnaire, for instance, it would be difficult to collect data from the entire population. In some instances, it becomes necessary for you to collect data from the entire population. It's called a census. This is what Zambia does every 10 years or something. They count each and every human being in Zambia, apparently. I have no idea. I don't know about that here. I do know that I don't think they counted me when I was a student at UNZA at some point, but that's fine. So sampling, right? So this is where you outline things like the sample size, right? Because it's not always possible for you to collect data from the entire population. What you do is you collect data from what's called a representative sample. Okay, so minimum number of entities where you're going to collect data from, that will result in you being able to generalize your findings, okay, or be able to validate your findings, kind of. And usually there are different ways of identifying an appropriate sample. These are typically tied to the measurement instrument as well, right? So if you're collecting data using semi-structured interviews, for instance, it's generally the case that you get to a stage where you reach what's called a saturation point, and so obsessing about what number, I mean, how many, or what is my sample size going to be, doesn't really help there, right? In fact, you can take advantage of certain rules of thumb that are used in literature, right? Say X number of people are sufficient for this particular type of study. But anyways, so something else you do here is the sampling technique. Now, by the way, for sampling, sample size, again, the details of these will be discussed with Professor Piri. I'm just highlighting these things because we're trying to offer or trying to provide some kind of introduction, right? But you have fancy things like Slovene, and this is my personal favorite. It's quite simple to use, really. Slovene sample size formula, right? So there are smart people that have come up with reliable ways of identifying a sample size. Your typical formula that they use, they take in different types of variables. Well, some variables are the same, really, but the idea is the same, right? A key input is your target population. Okay, so if you look at your Slovene sample size formula, you'll be able to figure out the minimum number of observations from where you can collect data by figuring out what the target population is, which is uppercase N, right? And then your desired margin of error, right, which is E here. Yeah. Typically, I guess a 75% confidence interval is generally what a lot of people use here, right? So margin of error would probably be like 0.5 or something like that. So you plug it in, and then boom, you get your number, your magic number, right? So in the case of I want to say in the case of UNZA, we can use UNZA, is it? So you do your due diligence, you do your research, and you say, I want to collect data from the entire UNZA population, student population at UNZA. How many students are there? University of Zambia. You discover, you won't use Wikipedia, obviously, but just in case you use Wikipedia, right? You discover, oh, they say UNZA has a total of, the University of Zambia has a total of 30,000 students, okay? If you say 30,000 students, then what I'm going to do is, I'm going to say, I'm going to compute the total number, the minimum number of observations from where I can collect data from, for me to get significant results by just plugging in uppercase N, which is 30,000, 123. Yeah, well, I mean, 30,000, 123, divided by, apparently according to this formula here, Not that it matters. In fact, Professor P is going to take you through all these things. So divided by 1 plus, that's uppercase, I mean, that's N, which is 30,000, multiplied by, wow, 30,000 multiplied by 30,000 multiplied by the margin of error. You're just going to use the normal 5% margin of error, which is 0.05. This is 0.05 raised to the 2, right? So in this particular case, if I wanted to collect data from students at UNZA, and I'm conducting a quantitative study, I would essentially need to collect data from at least 395 students, ideally. Right, so you distribute your questionnaire, and then you identify like a period within which the questionnaire is going to be active, and you essentially just stop once you get to a point where you collect data from at least more than 395 entities, ideally. Now, the thing is, life has become a lot easier, right? You won't really have to worry about a lot of these things I'm talking about here. There are online calculators for most of these techniques that are used to compute the sample size. It's always nice to know the theory behind these things. Maybe not, I don't know. But you can essentially just do this. So I'll plug in the 30,000, 1, 2, 3, and you notice, well, I hope I'll get the same result, right about the same result, which is 395 or something. So you can do this, right? What's important, though, is that you appreciate the importance of determining the sample size. And whether you like it or not, they will ask you when you're defending your proposal. You say you're going to conduct a quantitative study and you collect your data, you conduct a baseline study and you collect data using a questionnaire. What is the sample size? Usually our students will just throw some random number out there, right? 20. Yeah, but why 20? Why 20? So the answer is, you look at the sample size here. But anyway, so there's various types of sampling techniques and probabilistic sampling techniques and non-probabilistic sampling techniques. Professor Piri will walk you through these types of sampling techniques or something. Non-probability and probability sampling or something. It's usually nice graphs that you can utilize here, right? I guess these are just, I guess, the probability, right? So you go through all of these different types of methods. There are a number of them, right? Usually our students will tend to just focus on the things that they've probably heard about, right? Well, we used simple random sampling, but why? Why did you not stratify? Why didn't you not leverage cluster sampling and all those things? But I don't know. Anyways, so there's that. I don't know if that's it. Yes, there's a hand. Oh, was I muted? Sorry.
There's a hand, yes.
Oh, sorry. I wasn't muted, was I?
No.
Okay, I'm logged on to different. What is happening? I use Google Workspace. I was almost thinking I'm talking to myself here. Let me just close this. Sorry, but yes, please go ahead. Sorry.
So I wanted to find out, when you're coming up with your research design, before you get to the part where you collect the data, what if you are faced with limitations where, like a long time, I remember before news was public and easily accessible, you needed to buy a newspaper, and sometimes it would be difficult to even find where to buy from.
Yeah.
And certain information may need membership or subscriptions and payments. Yes. So when you get to that stage and then you realize that you actually can't afford to collect this information, does it mean you have to change the design and everything? Like, how do you go about a situation like that?
Well, excellent question, right, Ms. Levy? This is where, before you get to a stage where you're designing your study, what you do is you do this, right? But I want to draw attention to something important here. If you go to, I'm going to go to, bear with me here. I want to open this so that I'm glad we're asking questions that will help us understand why certain things are supposed to be done a certain way, right? Because sometimes, students will be, why are we doing this here? Why are we being taught to do this here or something like that? chart. You see, what in your proposal, right? In your proposal, one of the key things before you even proceed with your research, right? Because your proposal is going to be, you present at departmental level, and then the school postgraduate committee meets to look at, to consider your proposal. So what they'll expect you to put in your proposal is this, the study budget. So I want to argue here, Levy, right? And everybody else. I want to argue that before you get to a stage where you're even designing your experiment, you should already anticipate all of these different costs, right? Subscriptions, if they're there. And if it turns out that you're constrained, like you don't have the required amount of money for you to proceed with your research, then you don't do it, right? Or you figure out a way of doing it. Generally, you know, when you're conducting research, there's the so-called fair use, is it? I don't think it would be difficult to have your supervisor formally, right? Or your supervisor facilitate the school writing to wherever it is you want to collect this data from. Let's say Zambia Daily Mail, for instance, right? Or Times of Zambia, so that they give you access to these newspapers that you may want. You know, so but the key thing here is that you plan beforehand. This is project management. As part of your project management exercise, you have got to figure out how much money you're going to spend. And it's not, you know, I've seen a number of proposals from most of our students, right? Where you just have a few items and you can tell that there was very little thinking that went into arriving at that particular amount. Your best bet is you decompose, right? So you come up with this proposed project. That proposed project at a very high level is going to be clustered into research type of something. It's going to be clustered into objectives, right? Let's say you have a series of maybe I don't know, 2 objectives or something. You remember this, and I know why. Probably a lot of people will probably not remember this. Is when you're doing this at undergraduate level or something, is like you decompose, right? You come up with a work breakdown structure. So you say, well, I have this overall project that I'm working towards. How do I identify how much money is going to be associated to what I'm doing, right? You can decompose this by looking at the specific objective. So for objective number 1, what am I going to do? Well, I'll need to do a document analysis. I'll need to gain access to historical newspapers or perhaps newspaper issues for the next 3 months, okay? I'll need a subscription. Of course, it's cheaper now or something. But anyway, but the key thing here is there's a budget. The budget will probably help you address that issue. I hope that answers your question or something. You know, so there's issues to do with measurement instrument, right? So how exactly are you collecting the data, right? Common ways, you discuss these things with theory, just reminding ourselves here, preempting what's coming ahead of us. Questionnaires, right? Interviews, workshops, right? Document analysis, observations. I worked with a group of students, capstone, they were working on the capstone project. One of the things they did as part of the baseline studies, they went and camped at UTH, Department of Radiology. They were even helping the clerks there to process NEMA patients, cash-only patients. They were trying to understand the workflows. So they're conducting participant observations or something like that. But there's a whole range of ways of collecting data. In computing, because most of you, especially those at master's level, are going to develop artifacts, you're most likely going to conduct an experiment, is it? A quasi-experiment or a true experiment, ideally, right? Or true experiment. So the idea here is for you to test. Let's say you're proposing this really nice intelligent tutor to be used in primary schools or something. It's like, how do we know it's good, it's effective? Well, what we're going to do is we are going to deploy it into some primary school or something. We'll have 2 groups, right? Group 1, which is probably a control or something, and group 2, which is a treatment group, a treatment group here. So group 1, we'll just use normal tutor or something. or use human tutor or something. And then your group 2 is going to be exposed to your AI2 or something. And then afterwards, at the end, right? So conducting a longitudinal study or something. At the end, you're going to compare results. Do we have a situation where students from group 2 perform better than students from group 1? And you say, well, the result is because the reason why these perform better is because they used this tool here. Now, you know, the design of like quasi experiments has got to be systematic. You identify control variables, you know, because if you're looking at learning outcomes, right, there's a possibility that there's something else that is causing group 2 to perform better. It may not be the AI2, I don't know. It may be that because for them to use the AI2, maybe they have access to a computer, so it's a computer or something like that. But anyway, so you discuss these things, but measurement instruments, right? So in essence, when it comes to your typical research design, these are some of the things that you tend to look at. It's also quite common it's also quite common in computing for you to include something called I wouldn't say it's part of the measurement instrument here, but it's called like experimental setting or something. So some of you are probably going to be simulating things, right? So you're going to specify your experimental setting, or some of you are going to be probably measuring efficiency, is it? How quickly processing is done or something like that. What you do is you provide the experimental setting and say, well, we conducted all experiments on a Lenovo, sorry, I think part T14, right? Running Ubuntu 24.04.4 LTS, right? So you're telling people to say, when you are collecting your data, when you're running your experiments or something like that, you're providing them with this environment so that in the event they want to replicate your findings, the only way they can replicate your findings is if they can retrace your steps, is it? So they'll need to probably use the same type of computer, you know, the same operating system, and then typically you have even weird things, like not weird, actually, it's expected. You say we were using 3 run averages, is it? So if you're measuring, let's say, response time, for instance, if you're building some web application and you're looking at response time, what you begin to notice is that sometimes the response time is affected by what? It's affected by the things that are running on your computer, right? So what you typically do when you're running experiments like this is you do repeated tests, typically 3 or 5 times, is it? And then you get the averages. I did that a lot when I was doing my master's. I was conducting workload experiments, right? So you design your workloads. Maybe this will make sense if I can do this here. You design your OpenUCT. You design your I don't know where this is here, but open.html. I was designing my workloads in a certain, there we go. This is what I wanted. I just want to quickly go to the section of this document here. It's an old document from 2013, but it's neither here nor there. Workload. Workload. I'm just looking for workloads. I'm just going to go to page 58 or something. Where is that? 58. Somewhere here. I don't know if they're detailed. So as part of these performance experiments that we're conducting, I'm outlining the test setup, right? You notice it's a long time ago, I was using Ubuntu 12.04 something, .1, long-term support version. I'm even specifying the specific versions of software tools I was using to do my tests. Okay. At some point, I guess average. There we go. If you notice here, right? I'm saying here that Apache 2.2 2.2.22 web server and Jetty were used to host, module implementations, and Apache Bench 2.3 and Sage 2.7 node, blah, 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 to simulate a single user request with 5 run averages taken for each aspect request or something. And then afterwards, you do something like this. Anyways, but the key thing here is that I think the point I'm trying to put across here is that your so-called experimental design is dependent on the type of research you're conducting. Okay, typically in computing, you'll be expected to provide experimental setting if you are running simulations and you're testing your software, you're evaluating your software in a certain way. Okay, generally, if you're conducting usability evaluations or perhaps user experience evaluations, which user experience is a form of usability, really, you typically find yourself conducting an experiment, a quasi-experiment, I would call it. Okay, and then data analysis. All you're doing here is you're telling people to say, I am going to analyze quantitative data using descriptive statistics or something, or inferential statistics. Okay, or we're saying, well, for our qualitative data, what we did was we did a thematic analysis. You're just report in your proposal. You'll be saying, we will use descriptive statistics and differential statistics to analyze quantitative data. In fact, remember I mentioned the ritual here. You specify the software tools. We shall use the R programming language to compute differential statistics and descriptive statistics, or use SPSS version blah blah blah. Okay, and then for your qualitative data, let's say you're conducting interviews, you say, well, semi-structured interviews will be conducted, and dictaphones will be used to record, interviews with participants, and then afterwards the audio will be transcribed. After transcription, we're going to conduct a thematic analysis and stuff like that. Okay, if that makes sense. And then there's ethical clearance approval. And incidentally, immediately after that, after this interaction, I'd want us to jump into ethical clearance approval before we double back and start looking at the stage of the scientific method here. Okay, so in this particular case, all you do is you're specifying to say you got ethical clearance approval from entities X, Y, Z, or something like that. And typically, the way you report this is, I'm going to use an example from work I recently did with one of my students, just to demonstrate how this is done, I guess. I don't know. So if I can find what I'm looking, I know I will find what I'm looking for, but or maybe not. And I'm looking for, oh wow, I'm looking for this here. Not awareness, but maybe in 2024 or something. Oh wow, don't know where this is, but it's the one here. Yeah, no, it's that. So you typically be reporting under ethics, and usually in a document like what you're seeing right now, because this was being prepared as a draft to be submitted to a publication venue. The problem with this is you tend to summarize, right, things that you're doing here. So if you notice here in the methodology itself, what we're doing with Malaysia here is we're outlining that, mixed methods approach, yada and stuff. The University of Zambia Biomedical Research Ethics Committee and National Health Research Authority granted ethical clearance and authority to conduct this study. Boom, right? So and all you're doing here is you're providing, I guess, reference numbers or something. In some instances, in a large manuscript, like a thesis or a dissertation, you'd have something similar to this ethics. Page 90. I don't know if I'll be able to find page 90 here, but maybe not. Yeah, so something like this, it's actually a lot more detailed, right? If you notice, because this is in a dissertation, this is my master's dissertation. I'm providing details of where ethical clearance approval was sought. And in fact, the expectation in your case is that you'd even include screen grabs, right? Of ethical clearance approval or something. I believe my student Malaysia probably, anyway, that's fine. I can share samples of Malaysia's dissertation for later in case you want exemplars or something like that. Okay, so that's in essence, I mean, when you're looking at the experimental design, that is it, right? This is what is expected of you, right? So that's step number 4. But what you discover when Professor Piri takes you through this this stage, very interesting stage. I'll be honest with you. I mean, I use the scientific method in other things outside of work, by the way. You know, it's a very useful way of knowing, if you will. But Professor Piri will introduce you to a broad spectrum of other things like types of research designs, right, or types of studies and all those things, right? Some studies are causal in nature, or they're descriptive, or explanatory, or exploratory, right? And all of these things have implications on the type of measurement instruments and what exactly it is you're going to be doing. So step number 5, you collect the data, is it? Okay, so you've designed your experiment. Sorry, you've designed your experiment. After you design the experiment, you launch the studies. So a natural thing about this is you've decided that in objective number 1, you're going to collect your data using a questionnaire. And as part of your design, you say, well, it's an online questionnaire, we'll use Google Forms, and we're just going to get a snapshot, is it? In terms of the time horizon here. So we'll open up the questionnaire for about a week, we'll collect the data and all that. Well, the next thing you need to do is, so when you design that study, you need to collect the data itself, okay? And data obviously is collected in so many different ways. Once you collect the data, you've got to analyze it, okay? So again, just highlighting some common ways of collecting data. This is by no means comprehensive, but it just highlights some common measurement instruments used to collect data ideally, if that makes sense here. So once you collect your data, you then analyze your data, is it? And typically, it's a choice. It's a choice between analyzing data quantitatively or qualitatively. And whether you're going to analyze data qualitatively and quantitatively is dependent on the type of data that you are collecting, right? Yeah. So that's that, right? So step 5, you collect your data. Step 6, you analyze the data that you've collected, right? So that you draw your conclusions, if you will, okay? Or use that as input to drawing or reporting on the conclusions themselves. Yep. And then step number 7 is interpretation and reporting. Okay, so you have your findings, you collect your data, and you have your findings. You have got to come up with an interpretation. So it's like, I built this nice AI-based tool, tutoring tool. Okay, it's AI tool here. And I've found that students here, right? Students using, let's say, one of the key findings, students using AI tool perform better in assessments, whatever. Yeah. So this is a finding, right? And of course, this would have to be backed up by evidence, is it? So you'd say something like, I'm sure you've come across things like 70% of students using AI tool performed better, right? Better, right? Than those relying on a human tutor or something like that. I don't know if you've come across this. So say P. Oh, come on, P is less than 0.05, something like this, right? And there's usually a couple of other things that you add here. You conducted, an over test or something like that. Anyway, so you discuss this with Professor Piri as part of data analysis so that you get an understanding of why this is important, this number is important. In essence, you're telling people that the results you got are not by chance, okay? They can be generalized. These values here are tied to inferential statistics, okay? But the thing here is, if you have a statement like this, you have got to provide an interpretation of what this is. So in your discussion, some of the things that you can do is you can latch on to literature. You have something like this finding confirms prior studies or something like that. So there could have been other studies conducted, maybe using AI-centric tools where people found similar results. And then you would cite here as well. The findings confirm prior studies that assessed, the efficacy of artificial intelligence in learning or something like that. And then you provide citations to whatever studies you have. You're providing interpretation. Typically, when you're interpreting your findings, you've got to latch on to existing literature, right? You just don't say things here. I like using this example. You say, in Zambia, well, in the recent past, don't have to write this. In the recent past, females perform way better at grade 12, right? Or say our study seems to suggest that females perform better at grade 12. By the way, this is a fact. Studies are conducted every year here. Females perform better at grade 12. It would be flawed for you to maybe have some weird statement to say because females are more intelligent than males in Zambia, right? But what you can do is you can latch on to existing literature to say there have been a number of interventions that have focused on the girl child. And then you even cite such as blah, 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 and then you cite them. This helps explain why in the recent years, Zambia has seen a noticeable increase in the number of females that pass compared to males or something at grade 12. I don't know. So, but you are interpreting the findings. Again, Professor Piri will teach you some interesting things about interpretation of these findings here. And then after interpretation of findings, it's the reporting itself. Now, whether we like it or not, all of us doing our master's and doctoral studies, at a bare minimum, this reporting will manifest itself into a thesis or a dissertation, a long document. These are long documents, right? At the UNZA, you will be expected, apparently, according to the new guidelines, if things change, it will be different here, if they change the guidelines. But you will be expected to as part of the report, obviously, abstract is going to be formatted in a certain way. And then the actual manuscripts, if you go to, there we go. So if you're doing a master's by research, it's like, 60,000 words or something. If you're doing a master's degree by publication, we don't have this in our department here. Let's just go to where we not by research. I'm not really looking by research. I'm looking for something else. Not that it matters here. If you're a doctoral student, right? PhD by coursework and research, or PhD by research, which is all our students here, it's 90,000 words or something like that. PhD, I guess. 90,000 words. Anyway, so as part of the reporting and the usual stuff here, if you go through the fine print, they'll tell you spacing is what? spacing is 1.5 spacing, 1.5 line spacing, and I believe 1.5 line spacing is 500 words per page, something like that, right? 500 words per page. So that's 60,000 is 3 divided by 500. So for this one, it's the reporting you're doing 120 pages maximum. If you're a doctoral student, it's 90,000 something divided by, we become lazy now. Even 90,000 divided by SAD, you have to use a calculator or something, or use ChatGPT. So this is part of your reporting, right? But if you're a doctoral student, obviously, or in fact, even at master's level in our department, it's generally the case that almost all our students will at least publish once. Okay, so you probably publish a journal article as part of reporting, or a conference proceeding paper, something like that. Or it could be like a technical report if you wish. Okay? Typically, if you're working in collaboration with industry, they expect some kind of technical report. Or it could be a policy brief or something. This doesn't happen often in our department. It rarely happens actually, but you find these things like policy briefs, people in the humanities. Okay, so like a condensed version of whatever it is you've done, meant for policymakers, right? Policymakers are not interested in, oh, well, we conducted an over test and or chi-square test, or paired sample t-test and all those. They're not interested in that. They just want the important things from their perspective. Anyway, so that's the report. Now the thing about the reporting here is it's much more complex than we're making it seem here. Is it assembling a dissertation manuscript is an art? There's a predefined structure. You're expected to write in a certain way. When you're publishing an article, right, a journal article, for instance, or a conference proceeding paper, it has got to be written in a certain way. And typically, the way that you report, the reporting as it relates to journal articles here, conforms to the guidelines that are offered by that are provided, Medical Journal of Zambia, that are provided by that publication venue, right? So typically, most of these publication venues will have author guidelines that will tell you how you should prepare this report, the page limit, the citation style, the content that they expect to find, depending on the type of article or something. Because we are not in the medical field here, we can use what we are used to. Is it Zambia ICT Journal, right? If you go to the Zambia ICT Journal, right, these things that are published there are supposed to be formatted in a certain way, okay? In a certain way. There are author guidelines here as well. Sadly, when it comes to reporting, there are other things here that you'd have to take into account, you'd have to plan for, because our colleague, Mr. Mlevi, was talking about money and stuff. Publishing, in most instances, is not done for free, is it? So again, I think Professor P, when you're discussing reporting, will mention different types of publishing models, right? Diamond open access and gold open access and all those things, right? So it's notion that sometimes, if you look at the business models, sometimes consumers pay, sometimes authors pay, sometimes no one pays. What I mean here is, if you go to I'll use my example here. If you go to, I'm sure you've come across things that are paywalled, is it? If I wanted to access this, I don't know if this article, for instance, I won't be able to access this as a consumer. If a random person out there discovers that I published this some time back and they want to know what this is all about, accept. They don't have access to this document, right? This journal article here. They would have to pay money, is it? It's insane. Doesn't make any sense. This stuff is paywalled. Okay? Academic and personal use. So I have to pay this amount. Right? In other instances, some journals will provide authors with an option where they can make their article open access, so that when people are accessing the document, I don't know if I have an example of an open access, maybe not, they won't have to pay any money. But what happens is the authors pay money, right? It's an open access fee that you pay. Usually these are insane amounts, right? Average open access fees. And I'm saying this because if you're a doctoral student and you're looking at putting together your budget, these are things that you're going to have to take into account, because there are constraints here in here. When you're publishing, UNZA expects you to publish in certain types of journals, right? There are certain things you look out for, like the impact factor has got to be a 1, or that journal has got to be indexed in these major academic databases here, or something like that. All right. So typically, if you are targeting to publish in a top-tier journal, a top-tier venue, you'll be required to pay a publishing fee. It's called an APC, author processing charge. Okay. And usually are quite pricey, but you have to budget for that. But also the open access journals, a lot of them also. But the long and short of it is just hinting at the fact that this issue of reporting is quite complex, is it? So authors can pay, consumers can pay, or no one pays, which is all journals at UNZA, by the way. They are, what do you call this? All of these things here, they are free. Nobody pays to publish. No user pays to access documents. These are Classic Diamond open access. All 15 journals at UNZA, all open access. The Zambia ICT journal, I think you pay $200 or something like that. It's insane. But sometimes they'll waive costs or something. And the argument, by the way, is if you're wondering why do they pay? Well, somebody has got to look after this platform that is used to host the journal. People spend time, right, to review these articles that are here, right? It's crazy out there. But that's that in terms of interpretation and reporting, right? Really, it's all about writing. In some instances, I don't know if you're going to cover this here, but part of reporting means or entails what sort of tool are you using, right? So are you using your typical word processor, right, like this, or are you submitting to a journal that requires you to typeset your document, right? So something like this, typeset your document. So LaTeX or LaTeX, right? Especially some technical venues will expect you to typeset your report, right? So instead of writing using Microsoft Word, you use you typeset your document, right? You don't use a word processor. I don't know if people have used LaTeX before or something. I know, I think so far I've only worked with one student who decided to use LaTeX or something. Robert Msendo, he decided to use LaTeX or something, whatever. But it's nice like that. The quality is quite good. I don't know if you're able to see this. This is you may not have seen this, but this is LaTeX. This is LaTeX. This is plain old LaTeX. Just look at the quality here. Consistency, right? The philosophy behind LaTeX is you're focusing on the how do we know it's LaTeX, or we can check the metadata, right? PDF info, this is. We can check the metadata. I don't know if it's, yep, there we go. LaTeX with hyperref package here. If you open up, and you may not really appreciate this, but I don't know. If you open up the documentation, the thing, and you start looking through it, the graphs especially, you notice, oh, there's quite a bit of thinking that went into this here. Very nice, pretty document like that. Okay, but So that's step number 7, right? So in essence, those would be your 7 steps. A nice way of thinking about these 7 steps is what you are going to be doing, right? If you're enrolled in 1519, or if you're a first-year doctoral student, what you are going to be doing is essentially spending the next, for master students, 1+ years, for doctoral students, 3+ years, going through these 7 steps systematically. The reason it takes a while for you to do this is because you will find yourself learning and relearning a lot of things. You need to acquire quite a number of skills here. Data analysis, for instance, how to write, academically, or using academic speak, how to interpret your findings. Maybe if you've not done any inferential statistics, you need to teach yourself how to use R or how to use SPSS. In some instances, you need to enroll into some statistics course from maths or whatever, or, data science program and all those things. But the long and short of it really is that this is it in terms of the scientific method, right? So you go through these 7 steps. You define the research problem, you review the literature, you formulate the objectives and research questions, or where applicable, you come up with an educated guess or educated guesses. These are called hypotheses if there are many, or a hypothesis if it's just one educated guess. And then you conduct you design your experiment. You come up with an experimental design. You collect the data. You analyze the data. You interpret and you report. And then that's it. You're done. Now, I don't have any thoughts so far. I don't know if people have any questions about that. But I have 2 things that I wanted to walk us through just quickly here, right? Just to tie the different bits and pieces I spoke about here. I'm not going to waste a lot of time, but I may refer to some of these things as we cover some of the topics that will be responsible for until literature review. So I'll be referring a lot to this study. It's computing centric. It has a component that involved some development of some artifact, those quantitative data that was collected. There's quite a bit of statistics in here as well, although most of it was descriptive statistics because the focus on the paper was something else. So if you wish, at your own time, I do encourage you to probably attempt to download this document. In fact, if you just look up quantitative, if you look up the DOI, the digital object identifier, is maybe a bit tricky because the Springer Nature thing is paywalled, I believe. I could be wrong here. So what you want to do is you want to gain access to the copy that is on our research group website, right? So on Google Scholar, just look up quantitative analysis or Wikipedia pages, and you can gain access to this PDF document here. If this is making sense, I don't know. It would be nice if you had access to publish a copy, but that's neither here nor there. I don't think I should be going through the gory details of this here, but maybe just to quickly give people a bit of context. We can maybe walk through this briefly here. So if we were to kind of context switch here a little and tie this what we did here to this 7 steps. Okay. Now, in this particular paper, the problem we're attempting to solve. By the way, there's a corresponding capstone project report. I worked with these wonderful group of students here. They did some really tremendous work. The beauty of working in an environment at the UNZA, for instance, is you bump into very intelligent students and colleagues, which is quite nice and rewarding. But the problem we're attempting to solve here is quite simple, right? It's an obsession of mine here, to do with Wikipedia. So we made an observation. The fact that Wikipedia content contribution from global south countries like Zambia is quite low. So in other words, you have a sort of situation where very few Zambians go and edit Wikipedia content or create Wikipedia pages. Okay, so what we did, we made this observation, right? And so we carved out a problem. Yeah, I'll leave out the other gory details here, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of how you're linking these 7 steps to a given research problem, ideally. Okay, so what we did was we narrowed down our scope here by identifying specific objectives, right? These things here, 4 of them, right? Our goal was to quantify, right? Quantify Wikipedia content contribution, and in essence, try and determine, levels of awareness and willingness. In addition, we wanted to figure out ways in which we can provide incentives for people to actually contribute Wikipedia articles. Anyway, so we came up with these specific objectives, right? The first objective was to quantify Wikipedia content creation and contribution by Zambians, and then to determine levels of awareness and willingness, to identify perceived motivation factors, so things that would actually compel Zambians to actually contribute on Wikipedia. And then the last objective was to design and implement a piece of software that was integrated with gamification features aimed at motivating and increasing content contribution on Wikipedia or something like that. Now, what you begin to notice, right? We carve out the problem here. What you begin to notice is that if you you can skip the educated guesses here. The details of the educated guesses are in the capstone project report, right? The hypothesis, if you will. We did not include them in the paper here. But if I jump to the methodology, right? Of course, if we can start with the related work here, is it? Want to understand the related. You notice that all of these subsections under section 2 are linked to. They are linked to these specific objectives here. Generally, a rule of thumb is if you have X number of objectives, the expectation is that you're going to have X equivalent thematic areas under your related work section. So you're discussing literature aligned with those specific objectives. Now, in some instances, you may merge things, which is what we did here. But you notice here that some of these themes here are matched to the specific objective, like Wikipedia content contribution, awareness, willingness, and motivation. Objective number 2, right? To determine the levels of awareness and willingness. What else? Quantifying digital content contributions. It's linked to the first objective here, to quantify Wikipedia content creation. And then gamification for enhanced user engagement. It's obviously linked to the last objective here, design and implement a piece of software. Again, you notice once we start going through, a literature review part here, that you write in a certain way, is it? You're supposed to write in a certain way, and of course, cite. Okay, so there's that. And then the design of the experiment, right? It's in the methodology, is it? In the methodology, you notice that we start off by stating the approach, mixed method approach. In our case, we kind of provided auxiliary information to justify why this was a mixed methods approach idea, and providing cross references to the sub studies that were conducted, which are these here. In terms of quantifying Wikipedia content contribution, if you read through 3.1, what you begin to notice is that in 3.1, we are outlining where the data was collected, how the data was collected, right? As in the procedure followed, right? So for quantifying Wikipedia content contribution, you notice that we are indicating that we went and used the Wikipedia API to extract this information here. So we're in essence using these details here to quantify contributions. Okay. What else? levels of awareness. Again, you notice that the methodological approach in 3.1 here, where we're quantifying Wikipedia content contribution, is completely different from here. In the first instance, to quantify, we're extracting log data and analyzing log data from Wikipedia. Whereas for levels of awareness, what are we doing? We are using a questionnaire, right? Questionnaire. We're even providing aspects of the questionnaire. We have demographic details, questions or questionnaire items aligned with awareness and willingness. You don't necessarily have to include this all the time, but I guess it was necessary in our case here. I don't know. Okay. And then we have this sub-study where we are designing the piece of software. So this is the simplest part, because what you typically would be expected to do when you're outlining how you designed and implemented the tool, at undergrad level, it's what software process model did you use? Well, we used Scrum. Python was used as the base language, or use the Django framework and all those things, right? So if you read on 3.3 here, the students are just outlining how they built this Facebook plugin, because this piece of software was built as a Facebook plugin. And so it's just a process of how the piece of software is built, ideally. In addition, we combine this with evaluation. You just don't build the tool. They're also providing details of how the tool was evaluated. But anyways, afterwards, you're providing the results, right? The thing about the results is you are presenting facts because you collected data. You don't mess with the data. You just present it as is, right? Which is why typically in your results section, you have video representations, tables, tabular data, right? And results of your statistical analysis, your inferential statistics, p-values, and all those things. You're just reporting facts. At this point, you're not really, unless if you merge results and discussion, but you're just stating the facts from your data, right? This is what we're doing in here. We are showcasing this, but of course, highlighting important aspects of the data in this particular case. And then you have your interpretation. Interpretation is where you may actually be linking to maybe existing literature if it's applicable or something like that. Anyways, and then you draw conclusions. I don't know if this would be useful to understand, but something else that perhaps would be fun to read, and I do encourage you to, if you're trying to understand the research process, this is a classic. The Case of the Disappearing Spoon. It's a very easy read. It's classic research. If you download the paper, is centered around this research institute. The observation they made was that.
Hi, Doc. Where did you collect the data for this paper?
The data for this paper?
Yes, for the journal you made. I just wanted to know how, because I saw the data on the results.
You mean data like we have a number of results. So this was collected from here. So we did a document, I guess we call it content analysis if you want. So this is Zambia or something. For the first specific objective, we came here. Well, not literally here, really. There's an API. There's a Wikipedia API, but in essence, we are getting these revision histories for all pages. In fact, this thing is it's kind of interesting, right? The number of Wikipedia pages linked to Zambia, right? University of Zambia, University of Lusaka, Infratel, I don't know if MTN Zambia has a Wikipedia page here. Probably not. I'll be surprised. Maybe not. No, there's an MTN group page. So, but what these guys did is they did purposive sampling, by the way. So they couldn't really analyze, because analysis of the results of quantifying Wikipedia content contribution was not the core of what they were doing. So what they did was they just focused on purposively sampled Wikipedia pages. And this is interesting, by the way, because the issue of sampling is not tied to just human beings, is it? In this particular case, they were sampling pages, right? If this is making sense here. So this was collected using the revision histories. It's rich data, by the way, right? There's a whole range of things that went into here, because the way Wikipedia works is anonymous contributions have IP addresses, right? Whereas with Wikipedians, so people that have logged onto Wikipedia and they're editing, you won't know where they're editing from. So it's very easy for you to know whether a contribution is from a Zambian IP address or not, if it's an anonymous edit or something. Again, if you read their paper, these guys, their research was we did some really tremendous amount of work here, some really nice. I don't know if it's because I'm associated with this. So this was there, but the other data, so this is first objective. The other objective, which is this data was collected from a questionnaire. In fact, if I check here, this questionnaire is probably still there. No, I don't have to waste time, but I'm sure it's still there. I can't remember when these guys did their work here, but this was done 2020 and 2023 or something like that. I've forgotten. This is a really nice 2022 or something. I don't know. It's not Fraser's book, was it? I don't know if this is the one. Maybe. So this was from yeah, but the names are gone now. I don't know if this is the one, but so this was collected. No, this is the technology stuff. But anyway, so this data, this was from a questionnaire. So there was a questionnaire that was issued, and the reason I wanted to share this is because this questionnaire was actually twofold, right? So there's a questionnaire directed towards students and what we called the general public. And so the idea was to compare results from students and members of the general public or something. I pushed these guys to do this, and it was which is why we managed to publish at CSC actually, to be honest. And then where's the other data here? There should be some data to do with the gamification itself. And this is again from these results are from the questionnaire again. From the questionnaire. To give you an idea of the sheer scale of this, at the beginning, I guess there's an outline of total number of demographics of, there we go. So the questionnaire distributed, the general public had 60 participants, the one distributed to students about 82 or something. And then there's results associated with the tool itself. So they built this gamified version of like a piece of software where there was a back end which had a dashboard, some fancy dashboard. These guys were really good. This was before vibe coding, by the way. This was a long time ago, before vibe coding. So they literally handcrafted most of these things here. They did some really tremendous work. And then they built a Facebook plugin, right? So the idea was if you have a page that automatically pushes out statistics, like this is how they gamified this. Maybe you'll be able to motivate people when they see, oh, Lighton is top on the list and he has gold. Let me also get gold or something like that. If this makes sense. In terms of evaluating this, did they evaluate this? They did, but it was an expert evaluation. So you notice that they only have this vague kind of results here in terms of the system itself. Anyway, so I wanted to point you to this nice paper. I hope I've answered your question, by the way. There's a question about where did this come from.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you.
There's a capstone, in case if you're interested in this, there's a capstone project based on this. You'll find details here. This is here. So it's from 2023. I'm just going to share it with you here. Wikipedia paper, capstone report. And then the other thing that I think may help you understand what we're discussing here, the end-to-end process, what we're going to be doing is, I may refer to this every now and then, especially for the parts I'm going to be looking at. There's the so-called the case of the disappearing spoon. It's a fun research project. It's like what you'd call a toy research project here, but it helps put the point across. So there's this research institute I think somewhere, is it in Australia or New Zealand or something like that, what they noticed is that in their institute, spoons were randomly missing. So you have this research institute, they have a nice building where people work from, and then they have the kitchen, or they have places where you have spoons, the kitchen or something. Okay. Now, what they discovered is that the observation they made is that spoons were missing. So as good scientists, what they decided to do is to conduct a study aimed at determining the rate at which these spoons, right, were being lost, the attrition in essence. Okay. The other interesting things that they were doing in here, like trying to see if there are specific types of spoons that were missing. These are experimental factors, is it? Aspects are looking. Specific types of spoons. Or rooms, right? So they wanted to check, is it that the spoons were missing from specific rooms or something like that? So it's an interesting study, a very easy to read study. At your own time, you probably want to go through this because they mention a couple of interesting things that will pop up, especially when you start interacting with Professor Piri, right? Research setting, right? The study design here, it's a longitudinal cohort study, right? So it's a study that was conducted over a prolonged period of time, okay? They mentioned things like pilot, right? So they conducted a pilot study. Typically when you're conducting, when you're doing experimentation, I didn't mention this because you're going to do this with Professor Piri anyway. When you're on stage number 4, before you actually launch and collect data, you conduct what's called a pilot, is it? A small scale version of the study aimed at uncovering flaws associated with your research design, things that you'd have missed out. What I normally do with students I work with is I tell them just identify 5 colleagues of yours, right? Maybe master students or friends, and just have them fill out a questionnaire or interview them. And then in the process, have them give you feedback so that they specify which areas are not very clear. And then you do a very mild analysis of the data to confirm that the information you're going to be collecting is going to be useful insofar as answering your research questions is concerned. Because the reason you're collecting data is you want to answer research questions associated with your specific objectives. You know, so I do encourage you to find time going through. It's a fun paper, I guess. I don't know. I think you find it fun. Just like I usually use this as an example. It's a very short and easy to read, actually. They also have very interesting conclusions. I haven't been able to find a fun computing-centric paper, but that's neither here nor there. So I hope this gives you an idea of what it is we're going to do. Now, the thing about 5019 here is that the way that we are going to understand this 7-step research process is by making sure that we tie everything that's going to be discussed to the learning outcomes. Your program document is quite explicit in terms of what you should expect from the course. By the time we get to August, now we don't know what Senate is going to do now. Maybe it will be September, even October at this rate, right? But you should be able to create a hypothesis, right? And related research questions. In fact, this is what we're going to do immediately after we are done with ethical consideration. You should be able to get to a stage where you're able to critically review literature on a selected area of research interest in computing. In your case, if you're a doctoral student, you should be able to critically review literature associated with your concept note, I guess, as you're developing your research proposal. If you're enrolled in 5019, you should be able to get to a stage where you know how to critically review literature so that when the time comes for you to produce that research proposal, which is a key output from this course, and which is going to be used as input to part 2, you'll have done the correct things. In addition, you'll be able to develop a research problem based on gaps found in existing literature. You'll be taught how to use both quantitative and qualitative techniques both quantitative and qualitative techniques or methods to answer research questions. You should be able to design and implement a research proposal. I guess this is usually more tied to the master's students enrolled in 1519. Like, most of our doctoral students probably already know this, so it's just a review here. Maybe not. You must, you know how to use statistical techniques to analyze data. So I'm not really sure what sort of approach Professor Piri uses, but yeah, if I was involved, I would actually, I think we should kill this this myth, right? This obsession with SPSS. Ever since I was a student at UNZA, if for those of you that are students that did your bachelor's at UNZA, I'm sure you heard the SPSS song being sung from first year up to wherever, right? I don't understand where this came from here when the tool actually is not even free, right? So if I had control over this, I would say we're going to do a very mild introduction to the R programming language. It's easy to use. They're inbuilt. I don't know if I have R installed here, but they're inbuilt. No, I don't. But I can install it right now. R-based. So they're inbuilt. There are inbuilt methods that you can use, right, to perform these inferential statistics. It's not as difficult or as hard as it seems. It's easy stuff. But also you learn how to present research findings and draw appropriate conclusions from the findings. As mentioned, I mean, myself and Professor Piri are going to lead this here. Okay, so this is a very mild introduction to the course. I'm going to pause here before we transition to find out if there are any questions. I would like to suggest that we transition immediately to research ethics. Any thoughts about the course itself? I don't know if you have questions about the course. Maybe not. I don't know if you can still hear me though, but can't hear anything also. Can you hear me? Maybe thumbs up or something if you can hear me, but not knowing if we can change it here, but okay. I'm just going to change. I prefer to change it so that I know where we're going to. We're supposed to share these last things, and so download this as well, then we can start. All right. I'm just going to. So part of the reason why I felt we should start with this is I know that this is probably something that may be skipped. If you notice, and it's an important part of, it's a crucial aspect of research. If you look at the outcomes, there's very little, there's nothing mentioned here in terms of here analyzing outcomes. There's little mention of this, right? If that makes sense. So I thought we'll just have a very quick introduction to ethics, and then when we meet next week, we can then double back and start looking at how we frame problems and all of that, something like that. Anyway, so this lecture series, we're going to look at ethical consideration in scientific research. It should be fairly straightforward. I thought we'll maybe start off by appreciating research ethics as it relates to the University of Zambia, because you're expected to do this as part of your research. There's something that came up in the postgraduate, I don't know if it's fate here. There was a school postgraduate committee meeting that was held, and the assistant dean research highlighted a number of cases where apparently students, well, there've been cases in the recent past where students have gone ahead and conducted or started collecting data without getting ethical clearance approval first. That is wrong, right? It goes against the guidelines. And it turns out, right, that this whole notion of research ethics is about doing the right thing. It's not always the case that people police you. Forget about getting approval, right? I'll give you an example of unethical conduct like plagiarism, for instance, right? People may not really figure out that you cheated your way through university or you were plagiarizing content here, right? But what you should bear in mind is that that is unethical, right? So we're trying to understand, want to get an appreciation of what is considered unethical in academia, and the sort of things that are expected of us, ideally. Incidentally, most of what we're going to be discussing in this lecture series is tied to the things that you're going to find in clause number 13, for instance, in the postgraduate guidelines. There's mention of research ethics committees, for instance. Where else? I don't know if there's any other clause here. There should be another clause here. It's also related to what you'll find in clause number. This is number what? This is L, but this is 23.1.4L. Okay, so they provide, the university has provided a scaffold of how you should structure your proposal document. And one of the crucial things that you are expected to include in the proposal is ethical consideration. So literally, you're supposed to have a section called ethical consideration. And you notice here they're saying in this section, you should indicate how ethical issues will be considered. Okay? So anonymization of data, getting approval, and all those things. So it's part of the reason why we're having this conversation here. And incidentally, it turns out that issues to do with ethical consideration will be expected to be included in not just your research proposal, but also the final manuscript that you're going to prepare. In addition, some publication venues like journals will require that in fact, it's expected that you're providing details of ethical consideration, especially entities that provided you with permission to actually proceed with the study. And it's a really, really serious thing. What I have on my current slide is an excerpt from I believe this is my doctoral thesis manuscript. In chapter 5, there's a section that makes mention of certain interesting things here, like how participants for this particular study were recruited, okay, where ethical clearance was sought, right? You notice here I'm providing footnotes 1 and 2. So if you go to the thesis manuscript, you'll find details of the approval that was sought. At the University of Cape Town, if you're conducting studies that require that you collect data from the university community, you're supposed to get permission. That's in addition to you getting ethical clearance approval, you get permission to actually collect data. That permission is similar to this here. I don't think it's the case for UNZA. Maybe not. For my master's, I was conducting some study with developers or something, student developers, and so I had to get, if I can find what I'm looking for here, I had to get permission to be able to do that. Something that looks similar to what here. Sorry, I don't know if I have it. This would be the, yeah, this is the application to gain access to students, right? And then this is the approval I got from the Faculty of Science Research Ethics Committee, right, with appropriate approval code or something. Okay, so what I'm trying to hint at here is that this is something that is expected of you. In some instances, the expectation when it comes to ethics is you highlight details that or specifics of what it is you did to guarantee anonymity or privacy of the participants, right? So this notion that you wouldn't want people to know who exactly it is you collected this data from. In some instances, it could be sensitive information you are conducting. What else? There's a last statement here, which is very controversial, right? There are two schools of thoughts. Gaining access to human participants is difficult. It's notoriously difficult. So in some instances, you can provide incentives. Like in this particular case, I had a budget because my doctoral studies were funded. And so I used part of that budget to actually compensate students for their time. This was carved out as lunch or something. Is it transport costs? And 40 Rand was quite substantial. I remember I would probably get lunch here for 20 Rand at the time here, but that's neither here nor there. So there's that, right? So this is in your typical thesis manuscript, and in your journal article, you'd have something similar to this. I think I showcased an example publication, is it, where in addition to the research approach, you notice the second paragraph is making reference to details of where ethical approval was sought ideally. It turns out that if you're working in certain sensitive environments, they won't even entertain talking to you if you don't have ethical clearance approval. In this particular case, we were collecting data from health facilities, level 1 health facilities. So level Mwanawasa investigation hospitals and the investigation hospitals, UTH. So what we had to do was we needed to get ethical clearance approval from one of the one of the research ethics committees at UNZA. If you go through the postgraduate guidelines, you discover that there are 3 types of research ethics committees at UNZA. There's UNZA BREAK, there's the Humanities and Social Sciences Research Ethics Committee, and then there's NASREC, National and Applied Science Research Ethics Committee. They were set up because they cater for the different sort of disciplines that we have at the UNZA. So UNZA BREAK tends to focus on life sciences. NASREC focuses on physical sciences, so engineering, computing, physics, and all those things. And then HSS-REC handles anything to do with social sciences. Sorry about that. Social sciences. Okay. And I think we'll talk more about this, but in case you want to already look at these things yourself, you'll find the details on the Directorate of Research and Development website. So if you go under research and you go to ethics, you will have the details of these research ethics committees, including documentation that you need to fill out or something. I'll just say Rex at UNZA. Provide these details to you or something. Okay, so this is actually an integral part of this. Research ethics is an integral part of scientific research, really. Again, I'm just showcasing an example of proof. In your manuscript, all of you are expected to include in your appendices section, proof of ethical clearance approval. Because this sometimes takes notoriously long, you want to make sure that you plan for this process. You know, when exactly you're going to apply for ethical clearance approval, and all those things. Okay. I wanted to mention that at some recently we were with my colleague Piela Bewe. We were working on a project, and we were wanting to submit preliminary results to the Zambia Health Research Conference, which is taking place in Livingstone in the next coming weeks. We missed the deadline, obviously, in November here. One of the requirements for this, for you to submit thing here, you must have ethical clearance approval. If you don't have ethical clearance approval, they won't even wanted showcases. They won't even entertain. It's closed anyway. They won't even entertain looking at your at your work or something like that. If you find yourself submitting your research, your thesis or your dissertation before you get ethical clearance approval, they'll probably send you back, right? It's an illegality. It's ideal. Anyway, so the question really is what is research ethics, right? These are nothing more than just guiding principles that govern the execution of research. Typically, research that involves, human participants, I don't want to use the word subjects here, animals, and the environment. There's something interesting we need to appreciate, even though most of us are not going to conduct studies that involve animals, unless if there are people here that are thinking that are thinking of doing weird things like this, is it? Computer brain interfaces and all those things, right? I don't know, right? Where if you follow the history of neural linking, they started off by experimenting with pigs and all that, right? So what we're saying is that research ethics just does not involve just human beings, but also animals, right? It's quite common in the life sciences, literally at UNZA. I know of colleagues that conduct studies with those guinea pigs, right? The idea here is we're saying if you're doing that sort of research, right, you're supposed to take into account these guiding principles that govern the execution of that sort of research involving guinea pigs, or actual pigs or monkeys, right, if you will, but also the environment. In our case, though, in computing and informatics department, the vast majority of us are going to be interested in the human participants part here, and not animals and the environment. Maybe the environment, maybe not, I don't know. But specifically, really, these guiding principles will help protect the rights of the study participants. If you've built some piece of software that you'd want human participants to help evaluate, there's got to be some sort of guarantee that their rights are going to be protected. Okay, so things like privacy, for instance, is it? Okay, so there's that. But also these guiding principles will guarantee the safety and well-being of the participants. Again, most of the studies that we tend to do in computing are fairly safe to a certain extent. I don't think we really need to worry so much about safety, but a classic example of a study that would need to guarantee safety and well-being of participants would be drug discovery, is it? You develop some new malaria drug. What guarantee is there that these participants that are going to be used as subjects, I guess, to test this drug here, that they're going to be safe, right? There's going to be some sort of guarantee here. In fact, it's one of the reasons why in drug discovery, first of all, start with guinea pigs and maybe monkeys before you transition to human beings, right? Although in some instances, I guess, you know, what's there to do? I always joke with people, right? To say sometimes you will find that you're being used as a petri dish and you just don't know, right? You know, there's new drug, you know. Zambia is the first, everybody's jumping here. Zambia, first country to experiment with this this thing. Zambia and Zimbabwe, right? It's like, you know, what's going on here, right? Why is it only Zambia and Zimbabwe? We're being used as an experiment here. I don't know if these people that are being used as subjects of, I don't know, but I'm just saying here, right? Don't quote me on that one. But also these principles facilitate, you know, integrity and quality, right, of the research process and final findings. The idea here is simple, right? If you conduct your research ethically, right, ultimately, you're going to produce high quality research, ideally. What else? These guiding principles or ethics tends to guarantee transparency, honesty, and accountability of researchers. Okay? If that makes sense. Right? Again, just to kind of put it out there that you typically would be obsessing about research ethics prior or as part of the research design, the experimental design process. Why? Well, you remember that we said that typically details to do with ethics are included in the methodology. Is it? I don't know if you remember this. I showcased this as an example, right? Right in the methodology is where we have details of ethical consideration. In fact, when I was walking us through the structure, right, of your methodology, I said that you typically have ethical consideration. Okay, so this is the trigger, ideally. I've already made mention of the fact that the UNZA, yeah, the University of Zambia, expects that both research students and faculty staff adhere to ethical guidelines prescribed by the UNZA. This is a serious thing. What that entails is when you're conducting research, as a student and myself as a member of staff, one of the very first things I must do is I must obtain ethical clearance approval. In other words, I must get endorsement from UNZA to say you can go ahead with this study. Because I'm affiliated with the UNZA, everything I do is linked to UNZA. Okay? You typically do this after you're done with your proposal, because one of the key documents that you submit as part of the ethical clearance approval application is the proposal document itself. Okay, so like I said, details are available on the graduate.unza.zm subdomain. Self-explanatory really. But what's important to note here is that there are 3 research ethics committees. The expectation is that if you are enrolled in the Department of Computing and Informatics, you must get ethical clearance approval from the Natural and Applied Sciences Research Ethics Committee. Okay? I don't know what the implications would be for you if you go to HSS Rec, but typically these committees comprise of people that represent the various disciplines, in this particular case associated with natural and applied sciences. So it makes sense that they review application. The process is simple. You fill out a form, there are forms available. You prepare supporting documentation, you know, your proposal, a summary of the proposal, the protocol, information sheets, consent forms, detailed measurement instruments, so questionnaires or interview guides, if you want to use that. And then you submit your application. I believe the National and Applied Sciences Rec meets once a month or something, so they will meet and look at all pending proposals or applications. Then they'll consider those applications. Once your application is considered, you get an outcome similar to, I believe I don't know if I shared this with you here, but I have a student who was recently granted. You receive something similar to this. Just do this, download it, and open it from here. You receive something like this. Okay. If this makes sense, really. It's a very simple process. It's just that you need to sit down and kind of think long and hard about the application itself and save yourself time by ensuring that you include all the supporting documentation. There's quite a bit of thinking that needs to go into this, because things like measurement instruments, at this stage, you may, if you're a first-year doctoral student, you may not already know what sort of measurement instruments you're going to use. And so if you don't know, then it becomes difficult, right, for you to include that required supporting documentation. So what I'm trying to say here is that you need to think long and hard as you're drafting your proposal document, so that you're including the correct things here. Otherwise, they'll send this back to you, so that you make alterations before they can actually approve your study. Okay, so the key thing here is that it turns out that these underlying principles we're talking about, right, as much as we're focusing on UNZA here, because we are UNZA students and faculty, these underlying principles are universal. Okay, as in the underlying principles associated with research ethics, these are universal. They just don't apply to UNZA, right? So they include things like honesty, respect for the rights of individuals and animals, integrity of the ecosystem. And it turns out that some of the key things that they'll focus on, this NASREC, for instance, will focus on, is to try and see if you've taken into account issues to do with respect of individuals that are going to participate in your studies, for instance, right? Respecting individuals involves you getting consent from them. It is unethical for you to build a piece of software, some really fancy software, and then you randomly find students in the computer science department and just tell them, oh, I have this study, please. I have this application, use it, and then fill out this questionnaire. The normal thing to do is you first of all give them an information sheet which details I hope I'll be able to find this here. It's going to detail what your study is about, potential risks, potential benefits, and what this is here, information sheet, right? So you tell them, my name is Lighton, I'm conducting this study as part of my doctoral student. You recruit them obviously first, right? And then on the day of the experiment itself, you're providing them the information sheet. This is what my study is about. Boom, okay? Before you start, can you please sign this consent form, agreeing to the fact that you are willingly participating in this study? Sign here, right? You are being ethical like that. Okay? And it's interesting, right? There are people that have probably gotten away with this, is it? You don't even prepare an information sheet. There's no consent form. Nobody has signed anywhere, right? You're just collecting data. That is wrong. That is unethical conduct. And this is what we're trying to provide, is trying to make sure that we apply these universal principles. Anyways, it turns out that these issues to do with research ethics manifested themselves towards the end of Second World War, because there are a number of really horrible things that were happening, right? I don't know if people have watched these World War II-centric movies where they'll portray the ugly things that the Nazi regime in Germany was up to here. But also one of the examples I normally give when I'm teaching a research ethics course is experiments conducted in the United States, like the Tuskegee experiment. Very, very nasty things. I don't know how many people have heard of the Tuskegee experiment, but researchers, right? Medical researchers were interested in understanding syphilis, right? As part of their quest to understand syphilis, they were wanting to track the progression of the disease, yeah? And so what they did, this is serious, this actually really happened. What they did is they would deliberately inject syphilis into people that look like you and me, blacks, right? This was in the 60s here. And they wouldn't actually treat these people, right? Because the interest was to look at the progression of the disease. Now, if you think about this, right, this is like a classic case of unethical conduct, right? Why? Well, there was no respect here, right, for the rights of these human beings. If you go there and you actually tell somebody to say, we're going to inject you with syphilis because we want to understand the progression of the disease, would you willingly, you know, offer yourself to participate in this? If somebody agrees, that's, I guess one would argue that that's okay, maybe, right? Probably still be unethical, I don't know. But where you are hiding the gory details of this, that's unethical conduct here. Okay, there are a couple of, let me see other examples I have here. But there are a couple of other weird examples here, like I don't know if people have heard of the Stanford prison, the prison experiment, right? Where they're trying to, and I think there's even a movie that has been spun out of this here, it's a sociology experiment ideally, right? Trying to understand human behavior here by coming up with two groups of individuals, prison guards and actual prisoners or something. Want to look up the Stanford prison experiment as well. These are classic examples of, I guess, studies that were conducted back in the past that were unethical. Okay, so research ethics, very, very important. I want to argue here that maybe there are probably studies that are being done in Africa, in Zambia actually, that are unethical. We see a lot of people that will come in, fly into Zambia, we're going to conduct a study in Zambia, right? You just see this Caucasian come in here and you don't know what they're doing here, going to some remote area in the village, you don't even know what's going on here. But also even this thing here, I don't know what this is here. I hope it's being done ethically. I'm sure it is, since the WHO is involved here, right? Crazy stuff. Okay, so it's a classic example here, right, of a very iffy study, right? It's considered an infamous, you know, study, and it's usually included in many, you know, research-centric courses ideally. But the reason why research ethics is important, if we can latch on to these, you know, weird examples I'm providing here, is ethics is going to provide, research ethics provides protection of participants. Okay, so their rights, okay, their safety. I have a right to say yes or no to something. I shouldn't be forced or compelled to do a study. Just because a PhD student comes from UNZA, has developed this AI tool to be used in the villages, just because this person is seemingly educated doesn't give them the right to just force me to participate in their study. I should be free to decide whether or not I want to be a part of the study. Safety, right? Well-being, right, of participants or individuals who participate in the study itself. Again, you notice here, we are making reference to, I guess, instead of individuals, say entities here, because it's animals, human beings, and the environment, right? Although in computing, it's mostly going to be human beings or something. What else? I thought about something here, and I don't know how I forgot. You know, the issue of safety is interesting, right? If you are working on more, I'll give an example. If you're working in the education space, for instance, it's likely that you're going to look at, let's say, level of education or something, right? Are you focusing on primary school and stuff like that? Well, this issue of, remember I mentioned that you need an information sheet or something like that, and then there's a consent form, so that, right? Well, it turns out that consent in Zambia, I think, begins at, I think you can only get consent from somebody who is above the age of 18, if not 16. I've forgotten. I'll have to look into this. Now, it's interesting, right? Because it turns out that if you find yourself in an environment where you have minors, you don't get consent from them. You get them from their guardians. I worked with a student, Dr. Kadeo now, I guess, Kuyela. When he was doing his master's, he was interested in understanding this Mwao tablet. I don't know if people know the Mwao tablet. So I was interested in understanding the effectiveness of these tablets, right, in formal education settings in Zambia. And I remember I told him about this. You know, you want to be very careful about what we're focusing on, because if you're focusing on the students here, it's, you know, this issue of getting consent here may complicate things, although it wasn't really complex, right? So what you had to do in essence, long and short of it is, right, you got approval from HSS, right? He then got approval from Ministry of Education. He then went and got approval from the school, sadly house school or something, or schools. And then, right, actually collect data, he had to get consent from legal guardians. Right? So if you're dealing with kids, this is something that you have to take into account. Usually sensitive areas, if you look at students that would tend to perform these applied computing, students that will conduct research in applied computing areas, very notorious domains are education and health, right? Notorious in the sense that you'd have to, you know, go through a series of hoops before you can get approval. Our enterprise medical imaging in Zambia project involved us to get, we had to get ethical clearance approval from, we had to get ethical clearance approval from first Mozambique. Then we went to National Health Research Authority. Then we went to Ministry of Health. Then we went to UTH and Lev Medical University. Medical University or something. Investigation hospital. No. Yeah. So you know, you have to take into account all of these different things. And the rules of change in government entities take quite a bit of time here. But anyway, so there's protection of participants. Yeah. And then why else is research ethics important? Well, it actually helps us contribute to quality and contribute towards quality and reliability of valid and credible research outcomes. The thinking here is that if you are ethical in the way that you're conducting research, and forget about getting approval here, there are a number of other things that we're going to quickly look at here. Ultimately, the end result of the research is going to be actually quite credible and reliable, like that. The other reason we're doing this is for legal and regulatory compliance. In Zambia, if you're conducting health-oriented research, you are not allowed to do anything until you get approval from National Health Research Authority, whether you like it or not, right? You have got to comply with that regulatory body, ideally. And by the way, I'm told things have changed slightly. You even need to get some certificate or something like that. I don't know. For you to get thing. I found this out from the person who's leading this project we're working on, Piela. What else? Well, research ethics is important when it comes to public perception, right? And funding, right? The idea here is you want to prevent damage of reputation, right? And the broader field of study aligned with your interests. If you are unethical in the way that you're conducting your research and people discover that you're unethical, your reputation is going to be tarnished. In fact, the reputation of your institution, the institution you're affiliated to, may be tarnished as well. And this will make sense when you look at some examples of unethical conduct, things that I've heard of I'm not really sure if this actually happens. Like embezzlement of funds, is it? You get funding. You get funding. You get funding, right? From this is it. But you get funding or something like that. You get funding, and what do you do? Well, they give you money. We were in here, by the way. We got some funding. No, we're not here. Thought we were going to be here. 22, I think, is where we were. You get funding, right? You get funding, and then you embezzle money, right? You use money for purposes that have nothing to do with the research you're conducting here. That is unethical conduct, and it may end up tarnishing not just your image, but the image of the institution as well. Okay? Anyway, so it turns out really that these general principles, right, of research ethics we usually include things like research should be beneficial to society. So the idea here is that as you are working towards ensuring that you are ethical in the way that you're conducting research, should take into account these things, right? The research you're conducting should be of benefit to society. The research should be the researchers should be suitably qualified and or supervised to conduct research. This is the reason why at the University of Zambia, if you're conducting research, or you're pursuing these advanced degrees, you'll be assigned a supervisor. This is part of the code itself, the research ethics code, okay? Because you're still learning the ropes. What else? Well, participants in your study should take part in the study willingly, right? They shouldn't be coerced or forced. Not really I guess coercion. They should be forced or coerced. Anyway, I'm being skeptical here about coercion because I know that there are probably other people that would argue that this statement here, where it says each participant was compensated with 40 rand. Yeah. This is coercion, maybe in some books, right? For some people, this is coercion. Somebody really, really desperately needs their 40 rand here, they'll be compelled to participate in the study, not willingly here, but because there's money or something. Still free will, I suppose. I don't know. So that's that. What else? So participants should take part only on the basis of informed consent. So the idea here is that before potential participants actually participate in your study, they should consent, right? Give them a consent form, let them read, and then they must sign. I don't know if I threw those things away, but I had consent forms that I used for my studies when I was conducting my doctoral studies and masters, tucked away somewhere here. That is how ethical I was when it comes to research. Anyways, and then also, additional guiding principles include no harm should befall the participants. This will rarely, be associated with the studies that we conduct in computing and informatics, but it's worth knowing nonetheless. Unless if there are people that are, I don't know, I know there are people that are looking at mental health and all that, developing tools for mental health. I don't know. Anyways, also, data should be honestly and rigorously analyzed, interpreted, and reported. In other words, when you're reporting your findings, report the facts, right? Do not misrepresent the facts. Do not falsify things or fabricate results. That is unethical. Rather, go and collect the data using a questionnaire rather than sitting somewhere in your house or in your room and making up results, right? So that they lean more towards what you expect to find in your study or something like that. I mean, just to try and mention some issues, some ethical issues, and which stage of the research process they're associated with. I thought I would include this here, right? If you look at societal benefits, we see that these things will manifest themselves at the design stage, right? When you're designing the experiment itself, and also when you're reporting the findings, is it? Because the expectation is that the people that are potentially going to benefit from your study itself may only realize the value of the study after you report your findings. Like we say, social cash transfer is not effective, right? You're knowing about it after the fact. If we look at the researcher competence issue here, we see that this mostly affects the research design, right? So if you're not very competent when it comes to designing experiments, for instance, you're going to come up with a very flawed research design. When you're looking at the participants' freedom of choice, right, them willingly wanting to participate in the study itself, we see that this happens at the stage when you're collecting the data, is it? Yeah, this is when the issue normally comes up. Informed consent, again, it's under the data collection, because what you do when you're collecting data is you first of all provide participants with an informed information sheet, rather. After they read details about the study, you give them the consent form to sign. Okay, this is all done at data collection stage. At that point, they should be free to decide whether or not they should opt out or opt into the study. In terms of the risk of harm to participants, right? Again, we see here that this is usually associated with the data collection phase. This is for anonymous users, is it? And then for risk of harm to participants and identifiable participants, we see that this will manifest itself during data collection, analysis and interpretation, data storage, and reporting. The thinking here is that when you're collecting data, imagine you're conducting an interview, and let's say you're interviewing Lighton, right? Maybe you're conducting a study to do with technology use in universities or something. If you don't anonymize people, you risk writing something like, for instance, a lecturer from the Department of Computing and Informatics, and in parentheses, Dr. Lighton Piri, indicated that blah, 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 right? What we're saying here is that you'll notice that there's risk of harm to me as a participant, as you're collecting the data, as you are analyzing the data, as you're storing the data, because you have my details. A workaround for this is if you have your questionnaire, a simple workaround is you anonymize the data you're collecting, is it? You don't ask participants to provide details that is going to potentially identify them. So you refrain from capturing the email addresses and the names of people. Unless towards the end, if you want to follow up, you can have maybe a questionnaire item to say, if you're willing, if you're okay with us contacting you for a follow-up study, provide your email address or something like that. Okay. When it comes to interviews, the normal thing to do is once you transcribe the audio, you anonymize, right? So you don't write weird things like the radiologist from UTH said blah, 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 right? Because you know there are a few radiologists there. But you write something like this, right? In interpreting. Radiologist 1 or student 1, something like that. I think I did this as well in my, let me see if I can find, what is that? If I can find what I'm looking for here, participant. Maybe I could develop a, I don't know if I think I did this as well. I wanted to demonstrate how you typically would report things, right? And I wanted to, I think it's mostly in my, I don't know if I have it here, it's probably mostly in my, It's okay. It's probably in my doctoral thesis and not my master's dissertation. Yeah. Anyways, so there's that. And then when it comes to honesty or rigor in analysis and interpretation, obviously this is linked to analysis and interpretation, right? Honesty or rigor in reporting, this is linked to reporting. The point we're trying to stress here is that ethical issues manifest themselves throughout the entire research cycle. Okay? You can potentially plagiarize things, right? As you're conducting your literature review by copy-pasting things and passing them as your own or something. If that is making sense. So it turns out really that when it comes to unethical conduct in research, one of the most obvious and serious forms we include things like deliberate deception. So reporting fabricated results, right, or falsifying the findings. And this usually happens when people are under pressure. This has happened. I think recently, not this year, I think, is it last year or the year before something? There was a student who ended up presenting results that were too good to be true. And it turned out that almost all the examiners picked up on this. Right? It was clear that those findings were fabricated, right? Because it just wasn't realistic for them to collect, to gather that sort of data that they were presenting like that, right? The other obvious form of unethical conduct is reporting other researchers' work and passing them as your own, right? This is called plagiarism, is it? You are writing a literature review, maybe you're working on a paper to do with Wikipedia, and what do? You come to this paper by Lighton because they conducted research in Wikipedia, and you copy the entire chunk of text in here, right? Copy and paste it into your document. That is plagiarism, is it? If you want to cite Lighton's work, you must rewrite whatever came out of, or whatever was highlighted in the research in your own words, and then you cite Lighton's work. Okay? So is that. But it turns out really that there are other forms of unethical conduct here associated with the various stages of the 7-step research process, if we can call it that. And nice way of thinking about it is we can think of it from the perspective of general forms of unethical conduct, right? This may not necessarily be, perhaps directly linked to the 7-step research process, but these are still considered unethical conduct. Misuse of research funds. At UNS, I think this is instant dismiss or something. There's a disciplinary. I should share that with you. There's a disciplinary policy, and if you are caught, if you're found guilty, right? If you're found wanting when it comes to misuse of research funds, I think there's no warning. I believe it's instant dismissal. That's how serious this is. Incorrect reporting of publications in your CV, right? So you're applying for funding, and you know that that funding, you know that you're not going to get that funding if you are unable to demonstrate. Right? You're not going to be able to get that funding unless if you can demonstrate, right, that you have published and you are Lighton, right? You prepare this really nice looking CV, but this is done using LaTeX, and then you add under publications, is it like here? You add publications that you have not authored, right? Publications that you have not authored. That is unethical conduct, essentially lying, right? Typically, usually people do this, when they're under pressure, right? There's this call for funding that is at some Horizon EU funding with millions of euros at stake, and you just want to make sure that that you secure the funding. You incorrectly, or you add or include publications that you haven't authored. That is unethical conduct. Okay. Unauthorized data when permission to use it was refused, or when permission has not been granted. You mustn't do that, right? It is unethical. You are working on, I think we have students that are working on, I think we have a doctoral student, I remember, who is wanting to analyze, or she's going to be using a data set from banks or something like that, right? Even if you work for the bank, yeah, getting access to that data without prior permission is unethical conduct. Before you get access to data, you must get permission. Otherwise, I mean, you'll be engaging in unethical conduct. There are other forms, right, that may involve certain types of inappropriate behavior, like, for instance, failure to report unethical behavior by others. So if I, as a supervisor, notice that one of my students is engaging in unethical behavior and I don't report the student, or if I notice that a colleague from work is engaging in unethical behavior and I don't report them, that is considered unethical conduct. Okay, you must report. I think there's a whistleblower policy at the UNZA, in case you did not know. You can use that, right, if you're wanting to report people anonymous for something. This also applies to cover-ups, right, of unethical practice. So if you're in this position of power and you decide to cover up unethical practice, that is considered unethical conduct. What else? Lack of due process when handling complaints of unethical conduct. There's usually procedure, so UNZA as a procedure, is it? You probably appear before some disciplinary committee or something, or pet yourself and all that. So you'll be given an opportunity to actually defend yourself, right? But if you are not given an opportunity to do that, that is considered unethical conduct. Other things include reprisals against those who identify unethical conduct. So if Lighton reports somebody and people discover that he reported them and they want to get back at him, that is considered unethical conduct. I'm trying to see here if there's anything else here. I wanted to mention something else that you may take for granted, right? You know that, I don't know if I mentioned this here. I want to double back here and maybe talk about maybe other general forms. Plagiarism. Okay, no, it's fine. It's there, I guess. It's okay. Okay, so there are general forms, you know, of unethical conduct like this. And then there are unethical conduct. There's unethical conduct that can be conducted or typically manifests itself during experimentation or as you are designing your studies. So this will include things like risking harm to study participants. Okay, secretly conducting observations or recording of activities of others without permission. So you are conducting these semi-structured interview sessions, and your participants have told you that you mustn't record. If you're interested in gathering data, just take notes. But what do? You go with your phone and you're secretly recording, right? That is unethical conduct. Okay, compromising the privacy and confidentiality of subjects. So perhaps when you're designing your questionnaire, you include things like please include your student ID and your full name. That is wrong, right? Because you're capturing information that could potentially identify your participants, is it? You're compromising the privacy. Access to confidential data or information without permission is unethical conduct. This study we conducted here, which is tied to this, students at risk of failing. The data that was part of the data used in here was extracted from SIS. As an academic member of staff, I have access to SIS. Before using this SIS data here, in our study, we had to get permission. Even if I have ready access, I need to get permission. Okay. What else? Deliberately using inaccurate or unreliable data, right? Usually when people are under pressure, like you want to graduate, for instance, in most instances, people will engage in unethical conduct. The workaround I have, especially for undergraduate students, is usually very tempting for undergraduate students to do this, is regular meetings, right? So that we all know what needs to be done, Anyway, so there's that. And then examples of unethical conduct, during reporting and publication, we include plagiarism. So passing other people's work as your own, stealing other researchers' ideas. You attend some initial presentation, right, by a student, a PhD student, and then you quickly, kind of make minor modifications to what has been presented as a concept note, and you quickly produce a proposal by passing, the other person. I mean, you'd have stolen the idea, right? That's unethical conduct. Incorrectly attributing work or ideas to people not involved. It's sadly, it's quite common in academia. As I don't know about Unza here, don't quote me on that. There's this thing called gift authorship. I think it's called gift authorship. Right? So you have a colleague, right? Here's me. I have a colleague like Dr. Mayimbo Nyirenda. And maybe Dr. Mayimbo Nyirenda is very prolific when it comes to publishing, but I laze around a lot, right? I don't publish, I don't do research. So I approached Dr. Nyirenda to say, can you please include me on the next paper that you're going to write or something like that? Include my name there. That is unethical conduct, right? The idea behind authorship is, in fact, things are changing now. You must explicitly, you must ensure that you only include individuals that contributed to the work, right? Not just randomly adding any people here. It gets even bad. There are people that would even add their spouses to papers, publications like that, not even colleagues, right? It's called gift authorship, and it's unethical conduct. When you go to retract watch, you probably want to check this out, especially if you're in academia or something. What retract watch does is they mostly focus on highlighting papers that have been retracted. So the idea behind retracting a paper is, if people publish research, when people publish research, there are instances where there could be something fundamentally wrong with what was published. Okay, so there's a retraction. It's put down ideally. Okay, it's put down. And what these people do though is they'll report a bit more on issues to do with unethical conduct. So you probably want to check out Retract Watch, maybe of interest or something like that. I don't know. The issue of plagiarism here, it's interesting because in this day and age, I guess, people have become somewhat sophisticated in the way that they plagiarize content, right? It's AI tools now, but back in the day, it was so bad, and people have is that Dr. J, President Harvard, Harvard plagiarism or something. So I guess your so-called university president in the US is equivalent of VC here. There's this person, Dr. Claudine Gay. She resigned in 2024, and the reason she resigned is that people figured out that portions of her doctoral thesis were actually plagiarized, apparently. I don't know how far this has gone here. So this is a serious issue in academia. Sometimes you may think you get away with it, but sooner or later, life catches up with you. best you do this work here. I believe page using. There's another South African politician. There's another. I know this. I doubt if this happens a lot in Zambia, right? But there's another prominent politician in South Africa who was found wanting as well. So anyway, plagiarism, right? Plagiarism, you know, stealing other researchers' ideas, correctly attributing work or ideas to other people, claiming untrue and distorted or non-existent results. Again, usually when you're under pressure, you are forced to start making things up, right? Things that are not actually true here or factual. And this is the big one, publishing the same ideas in multiple places. It's considered bad form for you to publish work, right? You publish work at one venue, you get that work, maybe you just modify the title or something, you publish it elsewhere. That is unethical conduct. It's frowned upon in academia, actually. Okay, you want to avoid that, and it's usually the case that usually when you're submitting a work to a journal, for instance, they will ask that you confirm that you haven't submitted this work anywhere else, if that makes sense. Okay. I want to pause here and just find out if there are any thoughts so far or questions about this so far. Any reactions? No reaction. Is there, please, is there anybody who has engaged in academic, I mean, unethical conduct in the past or something? You can use yourself as an example. I don't know. It's quite wild here. Yes, is that a question? Please.
Yes, Doc. Doc, I think earlier you mentioned it's a kind of a cohesion to offer a reward for participants that might respond to a questionnaire. But what ethical method can you use to sort of, you want to compel people to respond to a questionnaire, because questionnaires have been coming, now and then have been coming, and they're used to answering them to the point that they now find them boring to respond to. Yeah. So what can you do to sort of elicit a response from participants? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's so the response, what he's talking about, by the way, what Chimuka is talking about, Chimuka is our doctoral student, he's doing computer science. What he's talking about is what's called the response rate, right? Now, typically, your response rate when it comes to questionnaires here, they're notoriously low, very low, actually. And I mean that and unfortunately, right, here's the thing. And I hope you can try as much as possible to get out of this trap. When you are pursuing these advanced degrees, right, there's usually this temptation to target people within the environment in which you're conducting this study. So in this particular case, you design your questionnaire or something, you're probably going to be collecting data from students, is it, and lecturers and stuff. And unfortunately, in any given year, right, like I, for instance, will probably have a ton of students approach me to participate in a study. Because every year you have, you know, fourth years that are doing their capstone projects. You have master's students, you have doctoral students. And a workaround would be diversify, right? Try as much as possible to see if you can probably target people that probably are not a part of the UNZA community. That's one thing. But the thing that works, the workaround, the only workaround that I have come across here is follow-ups. You know, and follow-ups require that you are quite meticulous about it. So there's follow-ups, that's one thing. And then just on low response rates. Yeah. And then I would say the way you craft the messages as well. So follow-ups are quite important. You send an email. The problem with most of our students is when, let's say, you're collecting data using a questionnaire, you collect email addresses of people, yeah? And what you do is you send that message and you hope that, or you expect that people are just going to respond like that. No, people are busy, right? I mean, listen, everybody's busy here. I'll check my mailbox, and the last thing I want to do here is look at the, what do you call this? Last thing I'd want to do is I look at a generic message to do with me responding to a questionnaire. I'm not going to prioritize that, right? But maybe, you know, if there's another follow-up, right, a follow-up message, I may consider that. So there's that, right? Follow-up messages. And, you know, there's a study I was using last, awareness study. There's a study that was conducted by this attitude of UNZA community towards, this one here, this. I think they talk about follow-ups here. It's an interesting awareness and willingness to use PrEP amongst University of Zambia students, right? A cross-sectional study. I believe one of the things that these people do in here, let me see if I can find the paper. They talk about, I think they talk about follow-ups here. Maybe we can use this as an example of follow-ups. No. No, okay. No, they don't. But the thing is follow-ups, because incidentally what these people did here is they also did, I think they also focused on this. They were filtering these results or something. This is to do with consent, by the way. You see, to be eligible for the study, students should have been 18 years of age or older. We know that some of our first years are much younger, yeah, and stuff. But anyway, so follow-ups, right? You want to follow up, and I had some really nasty experiences, especially when it came to, I think it's this. Observe the first message I sent. I don't know if I have a follow-up message. This was done in 2021, 2022 or something. But it's a way that you're sending, the way you're crafting the message, and then also you make regular follow-ups, right? That tends to help. So if you notice this is too generic, right? This is a horrible example here. I'm using myself as an example, but as a master's student, this is horrible. This is too generic, right? WW practical assignment survey, you know, so, and you're sending it to like all students at once, is it? Yeah. Consider creating tailored messages. And I remember doing this with, so the way you draft your messages, doing this with some of my students a while back here from me. This is that. I think this was a Moodle study or something. It was a while back here, but if I could find it. So these guys, I told them to use MailMage and stuff, right? So that you have tailored messages. So in the subject, you can actually have somebody's name, right? Like Lighton Piri or something like that. So that it's a lot easier for them to draw attention to the message. Yeah, but other than that, really, I don't think I have any other thoughts on the low response rate here. It's something that is well known in literature. The response rates are usually very, very low when it comes to questionnaires. But the trick is try follow-up messages. So you can say, give it a week. And then after a week, you look at, out of all of those messages that were sent, exclude the ones that have corresponding responses. Okay? And then you target those that didn't respond. Maybe you change the way that you're including the subject or something. You change the subject and you change the messaging. I've done weird things myself in desperation. You even start compiling phone numbers and you're using WhatsApp, you know, if that makes sense. So I hope that that helps answer your question or concern. Don't know.
Thank you so much, Doc. I'll try. I think let me use your methods of crafting a different
Yeah.
message because I.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, but also, you know, your target population as well. Here's something else that this will sound a bit weird here, right? But such a Moodle study that I did with those guys. And it was a while back here. I think I just joined the UNS or something. I did quite good. I don't know if, yeah, I just joined UNS, and that was one of the very first groups if you look at this. So if this was a study, so this is 2018. I was hoping they had trouble, right? So we used MailMage to do this. So we're targeting lecturers. So compiled lecturers, and we're using MailMage, where like the subject itself kind of like has the name of the person, right? So you're drawing somebody's attention to the message so that they at least open it and read it. And you're hoping that when they open it, yes, you're phrasing it in such a way that it's going to be very concise and also a bit catchy to draw somebody's attention to this. But here's the thing. This was done as part of the capstone project, right? And I realized that it was going to carry more weight if that message came from an UNZA account, like a member of staff or something, because we were targeting lecturers rather than the students. I remember, I think they tried to reach out to lecturers, and it was quite bad. So this was our desperate attempt at doing this. I'm not even sure how by clicking here, participate in the survey. I'm not really sure how much. I don't know if I still have it's dead now. I wanted to check how many responses we had here, but I'm sure there's a folder somewhere. This is all gone. I don't know. That's weird. Something. These are all dead links now. This is a long time ago. Okay, so there's that. Unethical conduct. I hope we've taken note, right? So unethical conduct is, I mean, there's quite a bit here involved, right? Some things are general forms of misconduct. Some of them are tied to the 7-step research process that we discussed. But I think what is imperative, what is important for us to appreciate is the fact that the focus here is all of these things we're discussing, right? They're centered around honesty and respect for the rights of individuals and animals, and integrity of the ecosystem also. I'm looking at the time. I think we can leave it at that. I don't think it will take long for us to finalize this, but I would want us to just talk about a little bit about when we meet next. It will probably take us an hour, maybe an hour and a half, and then we'll transition to the next lecture series, which is problem formulation and all that. I would want us to appreciate what triggers this, especially in academia, right? Why would somebody like Lighton engage in academic dishonesty? Maybe peer pressure, right, or peer competition, is it? I also want to have more citations. Then, anyways, and all that. I think we can leave it at that for now. But what I will ask you to do is, it would be nice when we meet for us to have a little bit of back and forth about the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and also the Stanford prison experiment. All of these things have really nice companion videos that you can find on entities like YouTube. So I do encourage you to just find, I know you may be busy here, just try and see if you can find a very nice, a relatively short but concise video that will help you understand these two studies here. It's quite maybe difficult for some of you to watch here, but this is nice nonetheless. So you'll find, probably watch something like this here, stuff. Okay, I think we can leave it at that, colleagues. This is 2028. Unless if there are any other thoughts, we are thinning the head here. next week when we meet, we shall actually start with stage one, which is how we frame problems and how we identify specific objectives and all those things. With that being said, see you when you see me. I shall share the recording for those that feel they will need to gain access to this as soon as it's done processing. For those of you that are doing this 1519 for credit, there's an exam for this, so you want to make sure you're taking notes, but also you are supposed to be working towards your proposals, right? And so it's important that you actually pay attention to this, otherwise it's a bit tricky. And if I were you, actually, if you're doing this for credit, if you're in year number 1 masters, what you want to do is you already want to start thinking about a problem. It doesn't have to be a problem for now, but an interest, an area of interest, so that when the time comes for you to come up with this proposal, it will be a lot easier for you to flesh it out. And in fact, if you have like a vague idea of what you're interested in, not just say AI, right? Because you may be enrolled into our Master of Science in Artificial Intelligence or something, or Master of Information Technology or Master of Information Systems. That's not an interest, is it? Okay, it has to be a topic within information systems, information technology, or artificial intelligence, or computer science, right? So that when we start looking at we start looking at how we formulate problems, rather than just following along with what I'm going to be talking about, or what Professor P will discuss with you, you're actually tying everything we're discussing to this topic that you're interested in. And you don't have to stick with that topic until the end, but it will serve as a starting point, in my opinion. I don't know. Yeah, I'll just share the slides. I've seen that comment, Ms. Nolwa. Thank you. Colleagues, good night. And for the AI people, I'll be reaching out. I was in transit yesterday. I've been off-grid here, which is why I was unable to mention that we're not going to have class, but I will kindly propose that we have a session, an initial session over the weekend. Thank you very much, everybody, and good night. Bye.
Good night. Thank you.